Well, thank you so much, Azeda, for having me. Thank you all for sharing your lunch with me. Um, really great topic today. But before I get rolling, I want you to know who's talking to you. I know sometimes that has a lot to do with whether or not we listen to the content. And so I want to share a little bit. I'm a family scientist here at the university. Really, what that means is I study families to look at the protective factors. I look at what makes families healthy and thrive and strive. And try and replicate that and identify what those variables are. And then we breathe into those variables into families across the state in an effort to make and build stronger communities and ultimately a stronger Kentucky. My title here is a senior specialist for parenting and child development. But I think what you'll hear and see in this slide is just that this is a lifestyle for me. This isn't just a job. It's something that I love to do and is just kind of who I am. I spent time in the Army. I've been an instructor and educator for about 23 years. I've had a blessed with a lovely wife who stuck with me for 19 years. I have lovely children. My oldest daughter, Eve, is 12. She'll be 13 this year. And so those of you that are in that parenting, adolescence, and young teens, I'm feeling you. And so a lot of what I share comes from personal experience. My son is 10, so he's hot on her heels. I have worked in family and individual therapy and have spent time doing that. And I've also done quite a bit of research and continue to do research on different family matters. So again, what I share with you today has been well researched. It's good information and really a timely release because like Azeda said, I think we did mention this maybe a year ago. She said, "Hey, David, would you work with me on maybe putting together something on child's well-being in social media?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And I was sharing with her before everybody popped on. I was putting together this slideshow and thinking about the content I was going to share. And then 3 weeks ago, those of you may or may not have seen this, the Surgeon General released an advisory, and I'm going to talk a lot about that. So I basically scrapped what I was doing because the relevance of what we're talking about today is buzzing around our nation right now, and hopefully parents and governments are really taking note of what the Surgeon General has said. And so I'm going to share a lot of that today in hopes of giving you good, credible information to help you in your homes, along with not just what the science says, but then what some suggestions are and how we can do that. So when we think about social media, we think about all the great things that social media brings to us. And because I think it's fair to say, and I want you all to hear me say, there are a lot of really good things about social media, right? It allows us to connect with our family and friends online, maybe like we've never had before, especially nice if we're geographically dispersed from our families. It really is nice to be able to connect with them. We've got the power of content in our hands. We can get anything, whether it's directions or apps or just new information that's coming at us all the time, and we can do that right with our phones. We share what we're doing, where we're doing it, and who we're doing it with. We get to share videos and photos. It's funny, I was thinking about this when I was putting this together and remembered my dad when I was a young boy had a video. The way he would take video was those big, huge shoulder cameras. I'm sure some of you in this who are listening probably remember those and just how kludgy and difficult things were. It seemed, but it really seemed like high technology there. And now you just do it on your phone and send it to somebody. Really a lot of power and fun in this. And really what we're doing social media wise is we're building our reputations. We have a profile now that sits out there socially that we can do. Internationally, we can present ourselves to other people and they can know us without having ever really met us. And we do that all through social media. But as many of you parents know, and as the research has shown, that there are some downsides. There's a lot of pitfalls to social media, and specifically when it comes to our young children. Just this year in February, the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, they released their findings of a 2021 study, and they said nearly 60% of all teenage girls report feelings of persistent sadness and hopelessness. Those are two key criteria when we talk about major depressive disorder. That there's 60% of our youth, our teenage girls, are not only saying that, hey, I'm persistently sad and I feel hopeless, but that 30% of those has said, hey, I'm seriously considering taking my life and ending it because of the way that I feel. And what was interesting about this study is that they found that while this statement that I have in front of you talks a lot about females, they found that it's also this sense of persistent sadness and this feelings of hopelessness have also increased among boys. They haven't to the rate that they have of girls. And you can see there the comparison in this 2021 finding is compared to just 10 years earlier in 2011. And what we found is that it's nearly a third, almost doubled in a 10-year span. And what was interesting about the finding that when it was put out is that a lot of people had keyed in, well, this was right after COVID, and maybe that pandemic caused the surge in all of this social media. But the reality is they did the due diligence of looking at the data, and what they found is that while we want to say it was because of COVID and that we saw a spike, the reality is it's been a real constant since 2012, which was when social media began taking its large splash in effect primarily with teenage girls. And so if you're listening to this, I want you to key in on the fact that I am talking about teenage girls. I'm not excluding teenage boys, but there is a higher rate of seriousness and a higher rate of potential harm when it comes to females over males. In addition to that, recently, as of like 3 weeks ago, May the 23rd, the Surgeon General reported that there is a fear, a real call to arms, and he's saying, "Hey, I want to advise the state Senate Finance Committee and the public to say that there is a profound risk of harm to adolescent health due to social media use." And what in this advisory he was doing is he's urging parents and governments to set more limits and more stricter standards for use on social media because of what's happening. And in this advisory, he states that 95% of youth 13 to 17 are using this media platform, even though it's not supposed to be for younger folks. What we're seeing is 10 and 12-year-olds are using it at a 70% rate. And more than a third of those are saying that it's almost constantly. I'm having a hard time stopping the use of social media, which will lead into more of what I talk about here in a minute. What was interesting about the report, and I do have this report, this advisory available to you in one of the slides. So when you get this slide deck, you can click it's an active link. You can go and read it. It's a 16-page report advisory. But what I've done is I've scoured it for you, and I'm going to talk a lot about what it says. But what was really catching is this middle statement. He says, we do not have enough evidence to determine if social media is what? Sufficiently safe. He doesn't say we don't have enough evidence to determine if social media is harmful. Matter of fact, we've got plenty of evidence that shows that social media is harmful. And so we're going to talk about some of the ways that it's harmful and why it's important that we begin to set these limits. But he says, hey, it's not an easy solution. And I want people to understand that. And I want to be fair about that with my audience as well, is that there's multiple factors that we have to look at when we're talking about social media use. It's the time spent on the platform. It's what kind of content we're consuming. It's the activities that we're engaging in the degree to which that separates us or disrupts those essential healthy activities like sleep and physical activity. One of the things that's interesting about the report is that we're talking about this point in a child's life is an adolescent's brain is under so much construction. And this is such a key variable to some of the findings that we're talking about, is that when that child is in that 10 to 19 year, age 10 to 19, they're undergoing a lot of brain development. And this is a highly sensitive period. This is what we're talking about, where this is when the risk-taking behaviors reach their peak. This is when They're experiencing the greatest fluctuation in well-being. This is when the mental health challenges such as depression typically begin to emerge, is in this 10 to 19 years. But also, if you listen to a lot of the work that I've done and some of the things that we've been sharing about adolescence, this is when identities and the sense of self-worth are being formed. And this is when the brain development is especially susceptible to social pressures and peer opinions and peer comparison. And what they found through research, and he identifies these studies in that report, is that girls 11 to 13 and boys ages 14 to 15. So I'll say that again, girls from 11 to 13 and boys from 14 to 15, that when they use social media, it is predictive that they will have subsequent decrease in life satisfaction. So they're saying, hey, listen, what we found is that if you have a daughter who's 11 to 13, or a niece, or a friend, whoever is 11 to 13 is a female and she's using social media, it is predictive that they will have lower life satisfaction, that there's going to be a depressive state that might set in. And the same is true of boys 14 to 15. And why is that important? Is because a lot of the brain is under construction. And this makes it very difficult for children to be able to predict that their use is good or bad. But what we're saying is that there's a lot of research that shows that it's not good. But what is good about it? So wait a minute, David, are you just an alarmist and are you just telling me that all social media use is bad? No, not at all. Not at all. There is some findings that show that there are some good benefits. And one of those is that social media provides positive community and connection with other people who share our identities, who might share similar abilities and interests. And that's important. As a matter of fact, it's great to have these spaces. And when we provide access to important information and create a safe space, then we get to see self-expression exude in those areas. And that can be really healthy. And we've identified that that is a healthy thing for young people, young adolescents to do, is to come in and begin to have a place for them to express themselves. It also provides opportunity for more diverse peer connection. The reality is that we have an opportunity through social media, our children have opportunity through social media to connect with people that don't look like them, that maybe share a different culture, that may even live in another country while they could live here and have all of those things different. We have the opportunity to begin to engage in a more diverse peer group and connect with those people. And then they also say specifically, there was a finding in a study that was identified that said that, hey, 7 out of 10 adolescent girls of color report encountering positive and identity affirming content related to race across social media platforms. A majority of adolescents reported that social media helps them feel more accepted and that they feel like they can find somebody who will support them in tough times. So there are some positives that come to this, but with those positives, we also are experiencing quite a bit of the potential negatives. What we find is that there was a longitudinal survey that they talk about, and it looked at adolescents from ages 12 to 15. And what we talk about, I teach research methods, and one of the things I teach my students is to always look at the sample size, like how large is the sample, because a lot of that provides power, but it also allows us to determine whether or not the findings we have in a research study are applicable or generalizable to the public. Can we take these findings and say this is kind of commonplace among most people? Well, when you have large samples and the samples are diverse, then you can say those things. And so this sample was nearly 7,000 adolescents aged 12 to 15. And what they found was adolescents who spent more than 3 hours per day on social media faced double the risk of experiencing poor mental health outcomes, such as depression and anxiety. Literally, the next sentence in this paragraph said, as of 2021, so 2 years ago, we found that 8th and 10th graders now spend on average 3.5 hours a day. So what am I saying? Well, I'm saying we're already at average above that 3-hour predictive point to say, hey, if there's more than 3 hours of social media, we know it doubles the likelihood that there's going to be depression and anxiety. Well, by average, we're well above the threshold. In addition to that, what we see is there was a study conducted among 14-year-olds, and this was nearly 11,000 participants. And this is, again, a U.S. study, and it found that greater social media use predicted poor sleep, online harassment, poor body image, low self-esteem, higher depressive symptoms. And this was larger association for girls than boys. So again, girls are suffering this at a higher rate than boys are. We talk about exposure to self-harm, but what we're talking about here is content exposure. And so content exposure is really difficult, because one of the things that's interesting about content exposure is that it's not always the doing of the individual who's on social media. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that a lot of the content is spread through direct pushes, unwanted content exchanges, and algorithmic designs. And so what I mean is, and maybe you've experienced this yourself, I know I do. The only social media account that I have is a Facebook account. So I know I'm outdated with that. But if I go onto Facebook and I were look through that, all of a sudden I'll start getting ads. And these ads are very provocative ads for a male, for sure. So I get a lot of ads of female lingerie, or I'll have bathing suit advertisements that'll pop up. And I asked my wife one time, I said, are you on my account? Are you looking at things? Are you shopping for things on my account? And she said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And so what you can do with those advertisements as they pop up, there's a little icon, and you can hit it and ask it, why am I getting this advertisement? And it simply said, you meet the criteria for 35 to 45-year-old male. And so just because I'm male, they're going to push me information. They're pushing me content that they think might appeal to me. And so, again, increasing the likelihood that I might expose myself to content that I myself weren't actually looking for, but that it just meets this algorithmic design within the social media site itself. What they found is more than 24 studies found that some social media platforms show live depictions of self-harm acts, like partial asphyxiation leading to seizures, and they have cutting ones that have led to significant bleeding. And in these studies, they further found that the discussing or showing this content normalizes these behaviors. And they do that through the formation of suicide pacts and posting of self-harm modules for others to follow. And whether this has happened to you and your family, or to someone that you know, a loved one, or someone you care deeply about, the reality is that it is happening. We can read these stories of young people who are taking their lives because they're being encouraged, heavily encouraged, through social media use. We also know there was a synthesis of over 20 studies that demonstrated social media use and body image concerns with eating disorders. And what they found was that there was a significant relationship, right, through social media use and body images. And the reason that is because there was this idea of social comparison. And what we know, there's been decades of research that shows as soon as we begin to compare ourselves to other people, we have a dramatic decrease in life satisfaction and happiness and overall well-being. And so when we begin to compare ourselves, we automatically begin to drop. They said that in a study, and this was 4 studies that they looked at, they had this related finding, and it was, when asked about the impact of social media on body image, nearly half of all adolescents aged 13 to 17 said social media makes them feel worse. So not only do we know that, but the young people are reporting that, hey, when I'm on this, it even makes me feel worse than I do already about myself. Then you've got cyberbullying. They had 36 studies were reviewed in this advisory, and they said that cyberbullying via social media, that there was a relationship that was found that when they were cyberbullying through social media, that depression among children and adolescents was extremely high. Not only Was it high? But who was it high with? With adolescent females and sexual minority youth, more likely to report experiencing incidences of cyberbullying. Nearly 75% of adolescents say social media sites are not doing anything to stop the cyberbullying that's taking place. And then the last piece of this was predatory behaviors. Nearly 6 in 10, they cite a study that says nearly 6 in 10 adolescent girls say that they've been contacted by a stranger on certain social media platforms in ways that make them feel uncomfortable. To add more to that, what we find is that not only is the content being a difficult piece to this and causing problems, but that there's also this piece of excessive use and problematic use. And so what they've found is that, you all know this because if you've ever been on one of the reels, you understand and probably have felt this, that social media platforms are designed to maximize user engagement. And they do this through a lot of different ways. But what's happened is that it encourages excessive use. And because of that excessive use, it has a behavioral dysregulation. So it begins to break down the ability to regulate our behavior, which, if you go back to that brain slide that I had, what you would have seen there is that ability to regulate our emotions is not really present yet. And it's what's happening at this critical time in brain development for adolescents. This is when children are supposed to be able to learn how to regulate their behavior. And guess what? We've got something that is in their hand all the time that is working in opposition to what we want for healthy development to take place. It's literally breaking that down. So it's working against us. And they do this through those push notifications, through infinite scroll. You know that you never end. I see plenty of parents that are scrolling through the phones, and it never ends. And I've heard parents say, "Hey, I spent 2 hours watching cat videos last night, and I have no idea why and what happened to that." And it's that infinite scroll. It's this behavioral dysregulation, and this is happening in adults who have formed those who has a fully developed brain. And now they're struggling with it so much that we can understand that young adolescents are also going to struggle with that. They found in the studies that nearly a third, 31% of social media use may be attributable to self-control challenges magnified by habit formation. They said that social media exposure can overstimulate the reward center in the brain, and when the stimulation becomes excessive, can trigger pathways comparable to addiction. Small studies have shown that people with frequent and problematic social use can experience changes in the brain structure similar to changes seen in individuals with substance use or gambling addiction. I hope that scares everybody that hears that, because the reality is that's what's happening to our young people. They state right after that finding, they said in a nationally representative survey of girls, again, a lot of this is focusing on females, aged 11 to 15, 1/3 or more say they feel addicted. Over half of them say it's hard to give up. And what they found is in that survey, when I said 8th and 10th graders, they said the average time spent on social media is 3.5 hours a day. 1 in 4 spend over 5 hours a day. And 1 in 7, which is about 14%, spend 7 hours or more a day on social media. In addition to that, they reviewed 42 studies and found that the effects of excessive social use or social media use found a consistent relationship between social media use, poor sleep quality, reduced sleep duration, sleep difficulties, and depression. One of the first things I did when I was working as a therapist, when I would work with young people, I worked at a university, Appalachian State University. And when young people would come in, the first thing I always asked about was their sleep. I always asked about what their food or their diet, but it was always food, diet, and exercise. Because one of the key variables to overall well-being is always sleep related. And so what we're talking about and what I'm hearing in what they're finding in these studies is that the more we use social media, the less sleep we're getting, right? All those blue waves that are coming in. It says on typical weekday, they found this in another study, nearly 1 in 3 adolescents report using screen media until midnight or later. 1 in 3. We're talking 33% of youth are saying, hey, I stay on my screen well over midnight. So you're saying, man, I'm ready to jump off this thing and go smash phones in my house. Well, I can't say I would blame you on that, but I will say that there are things that we can do. We may not ever see the ability for social media to disappear, but what we can do and what we have to do as parents is to stand in the gap. And the way we do that is by beginning the initial conversations, starting to talk to our kids, have initial conversations. I know if you have a child in middle school, you received an email at some point last year that was talking about sexting and the importance it is for us to have conversations with our kids about sending nude pictures to each other because it's becoming a real issue in our middle schools. These are great opportunities for us to have conversations with our kids. I've got a 12-year-old daughter, and so I also have 6 sisters. And what that means is I grew up understanding that a female's way of engaging oftentimes is through fashion. They enjoy fashion. They like trying on clothes. They like switching clothes. They like showing off their new outfits, especially around summertime. Maybe that's bathing suits. But what you probably notice in your own house that I've noticed is that children don't typically go to each other's houses anymore. They just FaceTime each other, or they whatever the platform is that they get on, and they share socially on their phones. And so they don't have to actually be in close proximity. But the behaviors in which they conduct are oftentimes the same, meaning that young girls would want to show off their outfits. And so one of the things that I talk to my daughter about is that, hey, I know it's important. You guys want to say, hey, do you think this looks good for the dance this weekend? And you want to show off the different dresses. What I want to make sure you're doing, Eve, is that when you do that, you're not taking any clothes off while you're on social media. If you're going to be on there, I don't mind you being in an outfit, but we're not going to change while we're having our friends on there, because we don't know who's on the other side, who's stopping, who else is looking on that phone, because we have fear that maybe the things that we're sharing might not be shared in confidence. And so we don't know how that's happening. So I want you to be smart in making sure that you don't get caught in that. These are the kind of conversations that I think we should have. On May 9th, there was an article in USA Today about a young man by the name of James Wood. He was a 17-year-old track star, and he took his own life because of sextortion. And that was a new word for me. I didn't understand what that means, but it is extorting someone for sex. And the way that they did that, and in this young man's case, he was contacted by a pretty young lady, and she said, hey, he's a 17-year-old boy. Would you like to see naked pictures of me? He's thinking, well, of course I do. Yeah, sure. Please send me those pictures. She sends pictures and then says, hey, not fair. I don't have any. You need to send me some. So he returns the favor and sends some pictures of himself. And in that, now all of a sudden, a man gets involved and says, hey, we've got these pictures of you, and unless you give us X amount of dollars, we're going to begin to share these pictures with you with all the people in your contacts. And sure enough, after a few weeks, he began to do that. And so family members, cousins, and friends began getting pictures of this young man. They were sexual pictures. They were unclothed. And so he says, at this point, he got nervous. He could not provide the money and took his life. These stories are super sad and very difficult to hear, but those are really good conversation starters to say, hey, this is what's happening. Can we communicate what our expectations are to our kids so that they know, hey, if someone contacts you like that, will you promise to come and talk to me? Will you please tell dad? I understand you might have made a mistake, but we don't want it to lead to this point. Or will you talk to mom? Whatever it is, we need to be communicating our expectations to our children. And we can do that through initiating conversations just by what's happening around us. Maybe those aren't things that you suspect or you fear that your child might be engaging in, but let us not be lackadaisical. Let us not think the best of our children, because we ourselves were kids too. We know that there's mischievousness that happens. We know the lack of knowledge leads to bad decisions. And so our children are not full of the knowledge that we have. So we need to be talking about it. And the last thing is on this slide is to be patient and supportive, right? One of the best ways that we learn things is through repetition. Rarely do I get things right the first time. I learn a lot of what I've done through life through making mistakes. That seems to be a pretty appropriate and pretty developmental way of learning. And so when our children mess up, we don't throw the book at them the first time. We try and agree to come alongside them. We be patient. We support them. We let them know that, hey, if this were to happen again, I want you to know this is what you do in that situation. So being patient and being supportive will win them and probably drive them to you more often than not. Supervision is absolutely mandatory. I cannot tell you how it breaks my heart when I hear stories and read a parent saying, you know, my child was being bullied and I had no idea until they took their life and I found their phone. When I talk about, I get a lot of pushback. This isn't the first time I've shared with a group that I think it's absolutely mandatory that parents need to look in their kid's phone. You need to be going through your kids' messages. You need to know who's talking to your friends. If you can't pick up your child's phone and read their texts, then at any time throughout the day, that I don't think you're doing a good job parenting. And this is why. Because people push back and they say, well, what about privacy, David? That child has a right to their privacy. And I would agree with that. If they're changing their clothes, if they're taking a shower, if they're using the bathroom, they deserve privacy. But when they're using a texting and they're talking to their friends, that is not private conversation. There is nothing that our children should discuss that in any way should be held private from us as parents. That is our job to supervise. We have got to do it. It requires a lot of time. It requires a lot of frustration, and it will upset your kids. There is no doubt they will tell you they hate you. They will not, if they haven't told you they hate you in a while, you might not be doing your job. Because we are going to upset our kids. We've got to consider what these parental controls are. Just because our kids are using something like a YouTube kids YouTube or whatever it is for kids, let me tell you, all that content on there is not kid related. It's not kid safe. The way that you can set up those parental controls, you will have to have a profile on there, but you can set up those controls. I've linked a video for how you do that at the end of my presentation. But it's not just kids YouTube. It's all of the sites that they go on. There's filtering. We can filter what goes out, but we can also filter what comes in. So there's blocking and filtering. The other thing is time limits. I want to read to you because what was interesting is that we heard that the average is 3.5 hours, but where we know that it begins to become detrimental is at that 3-hour mark. I want to read to you some of the findings that they had when it came to restricting use, because it was really interesting. So they did some studies, and they were randomized controlled studies. And what that means is they take a group and they use a treatment. And in this case, the treatment was they were going to reduce social media use to 30 minutes daily over 3 weeks. So one group was only allowed to get 30 minutes of social media use for 3 weeks. The other group could use it the way that they had, and then they compared the effects of the group. And this is what it said. When they reduced the 30 minutes daily over 3 weeks, it led to significant improvements in depression severity. This was particularly large for those with a high baseline levels of depression. So what that means is those that had the worst depression did better. It said the effect was improved depression scores by more than 35%. So it was a reduction in depression by more than 35%. If you take an SSRI, which is what they would say is a antidepressant, and you took it, it might lower your score by 1 to maybe 2 points, right? 2%. We're talking about a 35% decrease with just 30 minutes a day for 3 weeks. Drastic improvement. A second randomized controlled study showed that social media platform for 4 weeks, they found that the deactivation, so they said, hey, just stop using it at all, deactivate it, right? Take a break, right? Shut down your account. They did that for 4 weeks. They said the social media, it increased and increased their well-being by about 25 to 40% effect. They said it was a similar effect to psychological interventions such as self-help therapy, group therapy, and individual therapy. So simply what I'm trying to say is simply by shutting down that social media account, what they found for people that were already suffering severe depression and anxiety is that it had the same effect, the same positive effect as individual and group therapy would, just by shutting that down. So when I talk about limiting the time, listen, you have got to limit the time that your children are on it. It's paramount. It's not just, it's a good idea. It's literally could or could not save their life. We need to talk to our kids about what to share. You know, it's interesting. I'm looking at this picture on the slide and I see this boy with the headphones on. And my son is a gamer. I told you he's 10 years old. He loves playing all the games, and he does it via, I guess there's you can, I don't understand all this, but he's able to engage and invite other people to play with him on some of these platforms and some of the games. He had a headset for one day, probably about 35 minutes to be exact, before he said, "Shut up." And my wife said, "What'd you say?" And he said, "Well, you didn't hear what he said to me." And we said, "Well, we'll fix that. You will never have another set of headphones on." That is the kind of supervision I'm talking about. I need to know what people are saying, and I need to know what you're saying to other people. We're not going to talk to people like that. We don't talk to people like that in our house. We're certainly not going to allow you to talk to people like that on a game. And if someone's talking to you in a manner that makes you want to say that, I want to hear what they're saying as well. So it's important for us to review friends lists. How are you getting on this list? How are you playing these games with these people? The other thing is to post. What do we share? There's no, we can't take that back. Once it's out there, there's no return. And it's more than what we post. It's not just the things we're saying, it's the sites we're going to. Those algorithms get based on the actions of our youth. So what they're viewing, where they're going, how many times they share likes on things, that all increases the content in which they will see. The last thing I don't have on here, but I want to say before I go, is to be the example. I can't tell you how many times I go and watch my kids practice, and I'll sit in the stands, and I don't take my phone in for a reason. A lot of it is just because I like to be social, but I also like to people watch. And I'll go in there and I think to myself sometimes, like, wow, these people must have really taxing jobs. They're always on their phone. But if I sit close enough, all I see they're doing is they're just scrolling through their phone. They're just hitting all those little reels just like anybody else is. And the reality is we have got to model self-control and appropriate interaction with social media. We have to do that as parents because our kids are always watching us. These are the resources I have for you today. There's a lot. There's more than what's here. I want to highlight this, how to set up your YouTube controls. That's on there. If you want to read the Surgeon General's advisory, I would love for you to. It's 16 pages. It's right here. That PDF is available to you. A great documentary that if you haven't seen, I would suggest you see it and watch it with your teens. This social media, the social dilemma, is a wonderful documentary, slightly scary because it's by the people that help produce Instagram and YouTube, or I don't think YouTube's on there, but all the main social media sites has somebody. Pinterest is on there. Somebody from Facebook is on there, and they're higher executives, and they're saying the dangers of what happens with social media. So I want you all to see those. These are great resources for you or for children or for families if you're working with other families. That gives me, I think it gets me down to about 12 minutes before we're at the top of the hour. I want to open it up to questions. If you have questions, I'd love to hear feedback. If you have feedback, anything that I might be able to do from now until the end, I would like to be able to help you the best I can.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, David. Are you able to see them?
I am. Okay, I'll say that. Can you talk about how families and children can control some of the content online? For example, we chose not to put photos of our children online. He's 4 and doesn't care now, but his grandparents have objected to our rules, and it's caused some major issues in our family. Moreover, I have experienced times when I've had to ask people to take down photos of me that I don't want up. Do you have recommendations for helping our children navigate controlling the content that involves them online too? This is a great question. I mean, I hope in some ways I noted on some of that. You're right. It's really hard. And this was, I think, kind of getting to where my daughter was when I was saying, hey, I don't want you in any bathing suit pictures. I don't want you in pictures or in places where you're changing online. And the reality is that we cannot stop people from putting up content that is captured of us. And so this sounds more like the question sounded like it was more of a familial issue, and it's like my in-laws or grandparents or parents versus what I want. I think the severity of what we're talking about now is probably more clear than it's ever been. And so I think you can build a sharp case to say, hey, listen, this is what I've requested. This is what I've asked. I need you to take those things off. I will not post these content, and I will defriend that. Does that stop you? Does that stop them from posting content? It does not. These are unprecedented times, I believe, when it comes to social media. So in some ways, are there some things we can do? Yes, we can try and contact and tell our kid the best we can. But the other piece is we have to stand guard and do our best to keep that. So is there a simple answer to the question you have here? No, it's going to take some conversations between you and possibly either your parents or your in-laws to talk about that, Summer. But that's a really good question. I appreciate this. What do I want to say? The level at which you're thinking about this, because I think it does do that. Next, you say, I also heard about a family who bribed their son to stay off of social media until he was 18. Love the idea of hard rules like that. But there could be issues too. Any perspective on that? In this example, the family gave the son $1,800 on his birthday for staying off social media until he was 18. Listen, I 100% love the fact of keeping kids off social media. Let me tell you, it will not make your child popular. We have worked our way. My daughter is not in social circles that she might have been in otherwise because of her lack of ability. We don't do Snapchat. We don't do a lot of the ways. And I've had parents say, well, they don't communicate unless they're on Snapchat. And I said, well, I guess she just won't communicate, because I care more about her well-being than I do about her being cool. And I don't know so much. I don't want to weigh in too heavily on the bribing piece. I think that there are incentives, and when we incentivize children, I think that's a good thing. I like the intrinsic incentives versus the extrinsic incentives, but I think incentivizing kids to do the right thing can have its positive effects. Let me see this next one here. It says, often issue I have with my 12-year-old daughter is the creation of multiple profiles on social media like TikTok and Snapchat. Is there a way to prevent this? I wish I was a social media guru and could tell you the ways to go in and do that. I do not know. However, I would encourage you to do a couple of searches, because they're really, you are, I promise you are not the first parent that's asking, how do I keep them off of that? How do I guard against that? So I think in some ways you can probably get online and find out how I can create that and stop that. Some of that is going to, Jessica, some of that I believe is going to have to be some house rules. And it's never too late to start house rules now and say, hey, listen, I know I said that this was okay. I'm now realizing that was not that I made that choice without, or I made that decision without having all the information I have now. I'm going to change that now. I don't believe that there's ever a case where we say one thing and we can't go back and apologize to our kids and say, hey, listen, I got that wrong. So we're going to adjust fire and we're going to move from this point on. And this is the way we're going to do things now. You are not going to win favor in that, Jessica. Your daughter's not going to be like, oh, thanks, Mom. That's a great idea. She's going to be all drama, because that is how it happens. I want to also put that out there. We're using terms called addiction. So when you see children respond ugly to the fact that we're going to begin to stop the things that they need psychologically and physiological, that we're going to begin shutting that down, you're going to see people withdraw. And if you've never seen active withdrawal from substance users, you will see that it is not a pretty sight. There will be gnashing of teeth. There will be yelling and cursing and all the above. And there will be attempts to get that back. So expect that. Don't back down from that. This is, I think I want to charge you parents to say, hey, this is a responsibility that we have to stand up and take ownership and fight for our kids, because the reality is that I think a lot of social media can be detrimental to our children. And we have factual events of where children have lost their lives due to it. So please fight hard. Hopefully that answers some of that. Thank you, Julia. This is an excellent presentation. Such a short amount of time. I feel like like you were balanced, reasonable. Thank you. And material you shared was evidence-based. Thank you so much for that. Am I missing things? Do you see other ones there? Had a middle school boy. I won't allow him to have a phone, and I've always done my best to limit screen time. It's hard on us both. It doesn't seem to be the norm. He's always complaining about being the only kid. You know what? How can I make this easier? I wish, Shannon, that I could give you something to make it easier. I firmly believe that you are doing what needs to be done. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of parents that I see that I'm in contact with that are doing that. And I know what it feels like to be, feeling like you're running Han Solo, you're in it alone. But there are parents that I've run into that are willing to do that too. If you ever need somebody to vent to, Shannon, you're welcome to contact me or my wife, Ellen, and she'll probably tell you the same. We can commiserate with some of our stories, but I think what you're doing is awesome. Continue to stand in the gap. It's not a fun place to stand. And oftentimes, you're alone. Is this available for us to share with our spouses? I would love for you to share with your spouse, Kim. I think this is going to be recorded and those recordings will be put out. Abigail asks, is there any kind of happy medium that allows for contacts with real life friends? For example, I use social media channels myself as my main point of contact with some of my dearest friends, but guards against many of the dangers. So you're asking, is there a way that we can get real contact with friends, but keep away from the dangers? I don't think anything at this point that I've seen is fail safe, but I think there are ways around it. My daughter has a phone that she's not allowed to add people to her contacts. We have to allow that. And so right now we don't allow her on social media. She has a couple of things that she's able to do. She does do YouTube, which I wish we could shut that down. So I don't know exactly, Abigail, if I've given you a good answer to that. I don't know of anything offhand that allows that, but I think just continued supervision is the way in which I monitor that with our daughter. Shannon makes a good point. You might look here, Gab Watch. I don't know what that is. It blocks all access to social media, allows your child to call you and text you. Yeah, that might be, my wife probably knows this better than I do. That might be what she's got on hers. And Julia even put that link in there if you want to get that. All right. I think that, Azeta, I think that brings us right to the top of the hour. Yeah, I would love for you. And listen, if you're listening to this and you say, hey, I've got a group of people that I work with that needs to hear this presentation, I would love to share this presentation with as many people as I can. If you find that, hey, I've got a group of folks that I want you to come and do that, whether that's university related or outside of university, my contact information is here for a reason. Please feel free to contact me. If you, I would, like I said, I would love to share this content with people because I really believe the Surgeon General is, he really wants us to be aware of this, and it is a call to action. And I've joined his call to action, and be willing to share this with anybody that you all feel would be a good audience. If you can summons an audience, I would love to be able to present to them.